In this lesson, we're going to learn about the Basic Center. Refer to your assignment sheet and turn to the pages in your manual for the Basic Center. So let's review. What are the main psychological aspects of the Basic Center? What is the main concept? Well, the Basic Center is the center of will and survival. If you remember, we have the triangles of fear and courage that are associated with the Basic Center. It's all about meeting your basic needs of survival, and that brings along with it a lot of fears and need for courage to survive life's challenges on this earth. So do you remember where the Basic Center is located? The Basic Center is located at the base of the spine in the area of the coccyx or tailbone. And then what are the endocrine glands for the Basic Center? The endocrine glands for the Basic Center are the adrenal glands, and they sit on top of the kidneys. They produce adrenaline. So when we're talking about the sympathetic nervous system or like the fight or flight system, we're talking about Basic Center and the adrenal glands. So you recall the urinary tract. The Basic Center affects the function of our entire urinary system. So we have the kidneys, the ureters, right and left, and that little ureter valve, our bladder, and urethra. And the kidneys sit pretty high here. We see how they come up under your ribs. So if you were to put your hands, and you can do this now as you're watching the video, put your hands around the sides, around your sides at the bottom of your ribs, and then kind of drop down below your ribs. And your thumbs are in the back, your fingers in the front, and your thumbs will then be basically at your mid, if you drop down, your thumbs will be about mid-kidney level. So the kidneys just tuck under those ribs. So you can see that it seems like they're always higher than I think they actually are. The Basic Center also governs and nourishes the bones of the body. So bones form the structural framework of our bodies. We'd melt into a puddle if we didn't have any bones. They produce blood cells, they protect our brains, our organs, they provide a giant system of levers that allow us to move ourselves around, and they maintain a steady amount of calcium in our bodies. We'll specifically be talking about how the Basic Center energizes the bones of the spine. Here we're working with the mechanical spine when we're talking about the Basic Center, the vertebrae, not the spinal cord. The vertebrae are blocks of bones with bony wings, and we'll address the specifics of the spine in another video. So remember that we have our paired centers. You remember which center the Basic Center balances with when we do our paired balancing. Our Basic Center balances with our Crown Center. Basic Center represents the physical will to be, the will of our body, and the Crown Center represents spiritual will, the will of the soul. So being the will to be center, it's affected by the will to achieve, to do, to accomplish. It's affected by anger, but weakened by fear and depression, which is the lack of will to be. So the Basic Center is also about survival and meeting your basic needs, having those basic needs met in order to survive, like a roof over our heads, food, water, basic comforts. This brings back a time that I spent in Haiti on a mission trip. When you talk about basic needs not being met, that's Haiti. They did not have so many basic needs. It was heartbreaking to see kids begging me for food and water. Basic needs that we completely take for granted here. They have no running water. If they were more well off, they'd have a well in or near their homes to dip a bucket into, but minimal medicine. We were building a house for a family that had like 10 people living in a 10 by 10 little lean-to type of shack, which had multiple generations. A toilet and shower were rare, no electricity, no garbage system. So just garbage is just thrown all over the ground, no fault of their own for sure. Everything was polluted. The nice house where we rested and got out of the sun while we were building was dark, no power, just cement. Everyone sat around on the dark cement floor. Lots of bugs. It's one thing to live like this, but as they start to see glimpses of technology and social media on mission people's phones and such, they start to see how other people live, and they realize what they don't have. But this is, despite their living conditions, those people seem to have more joy, happiness, a faith in God than many of us who have so much. But I'd imagine if we'd check their basic centers, we would likely find deficiency because there were so many basic needs not being met. The basic centers where the consciousness of primitive man would have focused, fight or flight, where the baby would be focused. There can be deficiency if basic needs are not met as a baby. Think of a little baby. They can't survive on their own. They need help from their parents. So man focused on the basic center equates his or herself with his body and his needs. So he relates to materialistic bodily comfort, satisfaction. The dominant emotions all connect to fear because his security is invested in possessions and bodily comforts and health. Imagine the fear in those Haitian parents who have no food or water for their children. They don't have the extreme condition. We don't have the extreme conditions like in Haiti, but many of us experience those same feelings throughout the whole COVID pandemic. Fears of getting sick, fear for our life, fear of losing our jobs, fear that our basic needs wouldn't be met financially and with basic supplies like toilet paper. I just had to share this photo. This was an awesome photo that my friend Johanna posted when she finally found toilet paper in a store during the pandemic. Pure joy to overcome those fears of having to wipe your bottom with leaves. So toilet paper might be trivial, but it's still a basic need. So back to the bottom of this slide. So loss of basic needs can cause panic and or the expression of anger. And you'd feel that anger is justified. In fact, if you look at most situations where anger is expressed, most commonly behind it, you'll find fear. If someone is angry, they may have a full basic center, but it may feel very stuck. If they have depression, even if they don't know it, it'll often feel very deficient. The basic center should be full and flowing, not stuck or deficient, obviously. Both anger and fear affect the adrenal glands, and the repeated activation of those glands can lead to exhaustion and depression. Think of people who have long-term abuse. People will talk about having adrenal exhaustion, and it's actually true. When you're under stress for a long time, then you kind of run out of adrenaline, like your car runs out of gas, and then you're so fatigued that you can't do anything. The balancing factor for the fear, which can affect the adrenal glands, is courage. And you remember how we've learned both the fear triangle and the courage triangle. So we almost always balance them as a pair. So continuing on with more metaphysical aspects of the basic center. The basic center is the site where spirit unites with matter, the site where the will to be in the body, the will to be in form, the will to be in incarnation is held. At birth, the flow of energy from the soul descends into matter, our bodies, first at the crown center, then the energy flows from the crown center to the basic center via the spinal cord. When the energy of the soul reaches the basic center, the soul is said to be fully incarnate into the physical body. Thus, the energy of the soul flowing through the basic center provides the framework upon which the life of the human being is constructed. The basic center is where the spirit comes into matter. The basic center maintains the life energy of the physical form itself, that will to be in form. So has anybody ever had the experience of looking at your own mortality? Maybe you were in an accident where you almost died or something like that, where you just no longer take your life for granted. Anyway, the body is very interesting. If we look at the issue of suicide, just because you don't want to live doesn't mean that the body doesn't want to live. The body has its own switch. So if you look at these suicide bombers, they have the will to overcome the body's will to live. So for people to do that, for people who commit suicide, they need to overcome that overall will to be of the basic center. So they have to be very, very desperate. So if you get really sick and you think, I'll just float out of my body, well, the body may not be ready for you to float out. There's a physical, primitive life force that comes into the body from the basic center that gives you the will to live. As older people get weaker and weaker, it's harder for the body to hold on to that life force. It's easier for the soul to leave when they're weakened and their will to be is less than it used to be. So if you can imagine that early experiences in childhood, even before being born, those can impact the development of this center, both positive and negative. Our sense of survival and sense of safety starts early with our family and our childhood experiences. Like, was the child parented well? Also, as an adult, worries and doubts about job, income, and housing can create challenges that show up in this center. I have a friend whose adopted son was born from a mom who did a lot of drugs during pregnancy. Even though the baby had his needs met after birth, his basic center was very deficient. So his survival may have been threatened in utero or actually never fully developed. And then he was taken from his mom, even though he wasn't really aware of it at that time. So this affects the basic center. In this chart, I've listed a few of the characteristics of the basic center that needs balancing, and then some characteristics of a balanced basic center. So one that needs balance, we might see addictions, someone who's chronically disorganized, have a fear of change, failure, success, frequently ill, someone who hoards, lazy, sluggish. They just don't have that will to get moving. And then someone with a balanced basic center has the ability to relax and be still, be comfortable in their body. They feel safe, grounded, prosperous, punctual, strong sense of vitality. Ray 7 that we learn about in part 2 is the ray that we use to balance the basic center and its associated triangles. So this concludes our metaphysical discussion about the basic center. In the next video, we'll go through the anatomy of structures energized by the basic center.